We want to start off with a reminder that we are not doctors. Before you make any changes or try something new, always consult with your doctor and medical team first. Chronic illness can vary from patient to patient, so it's always best to consult with your own doctor for what is best for you.
Welcome back to I Determined. I'm your host, Mason Harvey, and I speak from the role of a patient who has Crohn's disease.
And I'm your other co-host, Michelle Harvey. I am Mason's mom, and I speak in the role of a caregiver. Today's episode, as Mason was just saying, is a long one, but it's worth it. Okay, so we're finally coming back to that little series we had started. The first episode had been about the changes to treatments for Crohn's disease in the past 20 years. The next one in the series was, why people don't necessarily trust bioscience companies and think that they want them to stay sick. Yeah. And so we addressed that in that podcast. And so now we're following that up with, why biologics are priced so high. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to kind of go into the depth. We're going to go in depth.
I heard a little bit about it.
Yes.
We're both going to be surprised a little bit. So.
Yes. And sometimes I like to kind of read some of this and surprise Mason because I know
you can see my reaction.
Yes.
Yes. What I like about that too is it's also nice to know something. I know a little bit of it.
You do.
But I don't know a lot of it. And so what's cool about that is instead of planning something to say, I have to just think about it and then make something up, and I can't just prepare for it.
Right.
So it's more free. Like what I'm saying is more genuine and not
think it's
how could I say this?
You're reacting like the audience.
Yeah, reacting like the audience, how you guys would react.
Right. And I think that's sometimes important in a podcast is to have somebody reacting like that. So, you guys listening can actually see too, oh yeah, he sees it like I do, or
and it's not just what do you mean? They're like, oh my Lord, how do they understand this?
Yeah. But I will say this topic is something we have talked about, not on the podcast necessarily. We have in some ways, but this is something we've talked about, and he's actually written some papers on something similar to this. And so,
I've forgotten those by now.
Yeah, but you do kind of know. So some of this will make sense. And, before we do start, talking about this, me personally, you can say how you feel if you feel different, but I think we're in agreement here that we're not here to defend the prices of biologics, defend the companies. That is not the deal. It's really here because we do feel there needs to be something improved. Something needs to be changed. But the only way to figure out how to improve something is to understand the current process, right? So it's if we're just going to get mad and be like, God, they price those biologics so high, but are they priced high or are they priced appropriately? And is there something that can be done to help absorb some of that cost so it's not passed on to, ultimately the patient? And so, yeah.
To understand something in order to fix something.
Right. So
we need to make flying dogs. How are we going to do that? You have any ideas?
But I think that it's important when you're watching this I'm hoping nobody is judging, saying, oh, they just believe in biologics because Mason takes them. And that's not what this is about. This is not about our opinion. This is about facts. Mm-hmm. And so you guys can make your own decisions. But I think it's very important to understand this. So with that, we've got a lot of information. So let's kind of launch into it that, yes, there is a problem with pricing. For most people, it's expensive.
Expensive.
It's hard to get approvals because it is so expensive. And so there's a lot of issues with that price. So we're going to first, we're going to take this, I'm going to kind of go through a different direction with this. So we're going to look at the drug itself first. I think it's important to start by looking at what a biologic is made of. Yes. I think understanding that is a huge part of understanding why they're so expensive. So please stick with us. I promise this is not boring.
Grab your pillow and your blanket. Try not to fall asleep. Get some popcorn.
This is good stuff. We researched this. I mean, he's done this for his own papers. For this particular show, I have, I researched everything, made sure that I found sources.
Not good sources.
Yes. And so first thing, but there is still some room for error. So I just want to make sure we always say that.
Room for error. Nothing is perfect.
Yes.
We are not scientists. We are not doctors. Oh. And we encourage you to do your own research, but do it responsibly.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're doing. Basically, what we've discussed some of this before. So a biologic is made of living cells, right? Mm-hmm. They use living cells to create biologics. So some of the notes that I wrote down. So the cells must grow inside massive, highly controlled bioreactors for weeks. So it's a process drastically slower than rapid chemical mixing. So what that means is like a chemical drug, something is a more simple drug. This is a much different process already. So
reactor, I hear that, and usually that's
that
a
sounds
big machine.
expensive.
Yeah. Whenever you hear
Right
reactor,
there.
it's a nuclear reactor, or if it's this, well, it sounds big already.
Right. And so it's extremely sensitive process. And so what they had said on the slides I was reading, that the slightest change in temperature can kill or deform the cells, and you're done. So they have to be very careful with that process as well. Climate controlled, kind of situation. Once grown, the target protein must be separated from millions of host cells and cell waste. That's a process. And I want to clarify too really quick. We're talking about biologic here. We're talking in the sense of any biologics, not necessarily we'll kind of go into that in a minute, but this isn't
a specific one.
This is like a process. Yeah, and they're all going to have slightly different
It's all going to be a little bit different, but this is the
kind
basic.
Basic idea. And so if you're taking something that maybe for cancer or something for something different, we wanted this to still apply to you so you can understand that as well. So after that, in order to do that protein separation, it requires filtration membranes that often cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per run. So every time they do that, only a small percentage after all of that is able to be used to make the final drug. The manufacturing itself takes place in an ultra sterile clean room that requires massive energy to run continuous air filtration systems. Okay, so I mean, it's just kind of crazy because you think about, you get the injection in the mail, or you get that infusion.
Yeah. The amount of work that goes into that little thing.
Liquid, and the amount of work that
on your eyes upon something that is immense, I will say this is making more sense. I think the price of biologics for the patients, without understanding this, is pure insanity.
So true.
The fact that I cost insurance like $1 million a year for biologics is insane. The fact that I didn't ask for this disease, but we have to pay for something to keep me alive. That sounds crazy. And something that I was, why would they do this? Is over time, the biologics that I get continue to get more expensive. And the way I would think of it, how these are made, which is obviously far from the truth, is like a car. You create the first product and figure, okay, this is how you make it. Then the machines print. And it's all autonomous then. And they just print these biologics out. But the fact that there's so much cost going into each one of these, the filter things they're talking about costing 100 million or 100,000 and stuff on one run. That's amazing. And then the other part that we're just talking about, the amount of money and work that goes into each one. And it's not just, okay, we figured out how to make it, let's just repeat that. The fact that there's so much going into each one is starting to make sense, obviously. I still don't like the price, but it makes a lot more sense.
It does. And unfortunately, it does.
Yeah.
Good points. And we're going to continue. I think you're going to be even more interested then.
Okay. Let's go.
So there's a lot of single-use equipment. They have to prevent cross-contamination. So they rely on, it said, disposable bioreactor bags and tubing, creating high recurring material costs. So that's part of it. And so also, we just kind of mentioned this. There's not one blueprint for how all these biologics are created. So each facility is going to be custom designed, to the particular biologic that's being developed. So it's not like, you're making aspirin and it's going to be the same process. You have different generic, because that's a chemical drug. It's a much more easy drug to do.
It's kind of like car factory analogy I was using. All car factories produce cars, or trucks, whatever, if you want to be specific. But just because they're all building the same car, there's going to be different robots on each line producing a specific model, For example, they're going to have a different number of robots producing a Ford Raptor compared to a Honda Civic, There's a lot more different steps you have to take, even though it's the same.
You're ending up with a vehicle. You end up
with a car factory.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's a lot of difference in it. This is a biologic producing company. Okay, but what's the difference? With the car factories too, they're able to just keep making them over and over. and the robots keep working.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to these, like you said, the amount of single-use things, it's not, oh, okay, we made one, on to the next one. No, you have to
Right.
refill it. Okay, once you're done with that one, take that out, refill it, and then that's costing more money and also more labor.
Right.
So that's also very impressive too with the
Right.
how it's in the cost. I have a feeling we're gonna get to the point where it's gonna seem like, oh wow, it's surprising how much is going into this. I'm surprised it is only this much.
I know. In a way it does.
Yeah.
And it does go there.
Which is sad because it's like, how do you solve this?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Exactly.
It's not a simple solve anymore. The amount of specific stuff going into it is quite the roadblock.
It's going to get better.
Okay.
Or worse.
Oh no. How is that?
So, depending who's listening. So, hundreds of quality control tests are run on every single batch. Okay, so
that's expensive, but at the same time, that's good because you don't want to get a faulty injection.
Right.
For,
So this is not like all steps you really want to skip. I mean, these are important.
Oh yeah, we didn't check that batch. We just sent it to the patient.
We just trusted it was okay. So the quality control on this is impeccable.
Yeah.
And the biologics, like we mentioned, they're highly unstable. You know, we kind of mentioned they're temperature sensitive. So because they require a strict climate controlled cold chain from the factory floor directly to the clinic, that's also, you know, you have to remember it's from the point that they make it at the factory, make it at the company.
It has to stay cold.
It's got to stay cold and it's got to get to the clinic, or in our case, to us.
Yeah.
It comes to us, it's shipped to us. So there has to be a plan to keep this product maintained.
Mm-hmm.
We have
Stable.
What's pretty cool now is they figured out something with Stelara. I don't want to speak for all the other biologics, but with Stelara, it's pretty cool now because it can be stable for, if it's like at room temperature, for I believe it's 30 days. I'm not sure. You know, don't quote me on that. But
try, guys.
For the most part, they have to make sure that it's climate controlled till at least gets there.
Yeah.
So that's a whole process. There's something I want to mention here about Stelara because I want to bring in, there's obviously many biologics, but the reason we're talking about Stelara is it's something Mason's on. So I thought, hey, why not? And so a lot of you are on that too. And you can, you know, kind of apply this how you want to. But I think this is important to understand for, again, why they're so expensive. Stelara is made using a specific biological factory engineered to brew. It's called an SP2/0 murine myeloma cell line from a mouse.
Huh.
So this is important. Remember, we're going to talk about something here in a moment, but it's a live cell, but it's their own specific, they call it like a brew, I guess. Okay. Once the cells finish brewing, the liquid supernatant, it says, is harvested. So it undergoes extensive steps. I'm going to leave out the fancy words here. Just go extensive steps, and they have to isolate the massive antibody molecule. And the reason this was just interesting to me. You guys won't be tested on this later, so don't worry, but it's just interesting. The size of it is roughly 148,000 Daltons in size. So 140,000 Daltons in size is the size of this massive antibody molecule. So they have to isolate it from the living host components because animal cells are being used, right? Mm-hmm. This process, it says it will do steps to ensure patient safety, basically, and because it is coming from animal cell. So because animal cells are used, the downstream process will include a mandatory hyper-expensive viral inactivation steps because they want to guarantee patient safety, that they're just, they're not just putting animal cells into humans. Like, that would be weird.
That wouldn't work.
But the reason I want to talk about this, I want to put into something into perspective that you guys might understand. So here's what we know. So we're going to compare this to aspirin, which is not a biologic. It's a chemical drug. But the aspirin is a tiny molecule weighing 180 Daltons. And because they are thousands of times larger than small molecules, a biologic now we're talking about, because they're 148,000 Daltons in size versus 180, they cannot cross the cell membranes or survive stomach acid. That is why they must be injected or infused directly into the body.
I see.
But the reason it was being mentioned was really so you can compare it, because when you hear 148,000 Daltons, you're like, well,
what does that mean?
What does that mean? But that is vastly different than when we're talking about over-the-counter drugs, or even, some prescription drugs and things like that. So anyways, I just thought that was interesting. And I have a note here. We're not going to talk too much about this, but
It's just a big part.
this is something that I think at this part is worth adding to this. And this is where I've kind of started. Mason already kind of knows about this, but I thought it was very interesting. I did try to verify this.
Familiar.
It looks to be true where I have verified it on the science sites, all that. But this is why so we have another podcast on this. So if you can watch that for more details, but really quickly, I want to throw this in here because we were just talking about the SP2/0 mouse cells.
HTTPS.
So this is why biosimilars are not considered generics of a biologic drug. They do not use the same cell brew. Like when we're talking about Stelara, we're going to use this example with Stelara. Okay, so some other biosimilar companies might even use, in which this is some they do use, I don't know which ones, they use the Chinese hamster ovaries called the CHO cells instead of the original SP2/0 mouse cell line. So they don't have access to that proprietary brew that Stelara has. So they're making something else, but they're not using the same things, right?
Base.
Right. So because different living cells attach sugars to proteins differently, a change as microscopic as switching from a mouse cell factory to like a hamster cell factory could alter the drug's half-life and how long it stays active in a patient's body.
Interesting.
Stelara is produced using the mouse cell line, we'll say, and some biosimilars may have the CHO, that hamster cells, instead. What's important to note, though, is that they do regulatory approval that has to demonstrate, though, that any differences are not clinically meaningful. But,
I mean, I feel like that is, in some cases, not true. Because some of the biosimilars, they're like, oh, hey, it works for something else. So we'll say it works for this. And,
right. And some people have taken them with great success. Others have not. And I think it makes sense because it must bind differently. Some people are just different. And so you don't know until you take it if it's probably going to work because it's not identical. It's similar. So anyways, we're not going to talk too much about it. But I thought that was really interesting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Mason, guess what? You have more common with Mickey Mouse than you thought. And
Stelara, it all started with the mouse. Don't sue us, cop. Don't sue us, Disney.
I know, but right, we were having fun with that. So anyways, we're gonna get back to what we were talking about, but I think that was still important to the discussion today. Something, the more you know.
The more you know.
The more you know. So now that we've talked about the price, you can see why, what goes into just making a biologic to get it to you. We're going to take it further back because there are more costs that are added onto this, not just the cost you're seeing to produce the product you're getting today. Before a biologic exists, it has to be discovered, right? It's never been like...
Not just...
Yeah, it was like not there. You've got to find it. So there must be research that goes into creating biologic, right? And then that research turns into a lot of testing.
Okay.
All of that costs money. And so a lot of people don't factor this in when they're looking at, well, how much could it cost to make this? Well, how much should it make to even get to the point
to where you can make it
okay. Right? To get to that cost. So let's talk about the earlier costs.
I see a big number.
So this one I haven't verified on too many other sites, but it did connect back to a site that said it's estimated that $1 to $2 billion went to Stelara's research and development.
Right.
The direct out-of-pocket cash spends is not that might be in the hundreds of millions, which is still a lot.
Yeah.
But the massive multi-billion-dollar price that a lot of us see represents risk adjusted costs, which we're going to go into. Okay. So this is, and I really hope this isn't boring because this is super important. I feel like stuff to understand in order to understand why you're being charged. I hope not. What that risk adjusted cost, it means that a drug company must they must take the immense cost of hundreds of failed trial molecules into the price of the one drug that successfully reaches the market, right? Let's start here. Research and development, the timeline. Say you're like, we're going to create this, right? We want to make this new drug.
We're just going to make a biologic, guys.
The research and development timeline is about 12 to 15 years. Okay, so you have, before you're even seeing it on a certain phase, 12 to 15 years. That's a lot of money being invested without any return at that point. You're just kind of launching into it,
hoping you're gonna find, hoping it's gonna work.
Which is crazy. So before a biologic ever enters a human trial, scientists spend 3 to 5 years identifying the correct therapeutic target. So for Stelara, that would have meant mapping out the human antibody genes to isolate a protein that could specifically block that IL-12 and IL-23, those interleukins. That phase required massive spending. on advanced genetic sequencing, automated lab screenings, and early animal testing.
Okay.
So there's a huge...
Before the point where they're even producing something and putting it out, they're already paying a lot of money is going into this. So it makes sense that obviously they have to recoup that cost that they took going into it.
They're keeping accounting and they have records.
But they also have to make money in order to both make money and keep pushing to make the biologics, because they're juggling two things.
And so there's different things, like a big company like Takeda or Johnson & Johnson, they're going to be able to reinvest their own money into something. Then there's startups that are going to have like venture capitalists. They're going to have investors. They may even, release it into the stocks where you can, be a part owner in it, that sort of thing. So there's a bunch of different, methods depending on who's making this. And so, yeah, it's crazy expensive.
Yeah,
so
there's a good reason.
Yeah. And so
reason for everything.
Clinical testing accounts for roughly 68% of all out-of-pocket research and development expenditures. That's a high percentage. So this is a part where they do the trials, right? So now you've done all this other research, you've created something, and so now you're like, we got to test it out. We got to see if this works, right? Phase 1 is where safety of a product is tested on volunteers for basic safety and side effects, right? They're just trying to see, like, is this going to kill somebody? Is this going to...
Yeah, we'll give you some money in your will.
Is this going to cause some other manifestation too? What are the problems here with this? So then from there, they go to phase 2, which tests efficacy and dosing.
Like how much you need to dose.
Right,
Remember, at this point, even though they figured out something that potentially works,
how much do they give you? Right?
How much do they give you? Do they give you a bag, like an infusion, or do they give you a little...
And it's going to be different.
Shot? This
is important to note. Like Stelara can be used for, I think, like psoriatic arthritis, a few different things, but that would be different than for someone with Crohn's. Okay. So they'd be looking at you're looking at different trials for those, or different tests for those.
So is where you have to be careful because you send the wrong shot over.
Well, in that phase 2, you have to use a few hundred patients with the diagnosis you're targeting. So like Crohn's, and you have to prove the drug works and then find the proper dosage amounts. Wow. Scary to me. That's very so
you have to be very careful with that, because you don't want to, it doesn't seem to be working. You can't just say, okay, add 500 milligrams.
And you have to figure it, have to like you've always needed more. And so they have to figure out an average, like for the people who needed more, people who needed less, people in the middle. So they got to find a happy medium where it's helping everybody.
Say someone who's like me doing the test.
Yeah.
And who takes like twice the amount of the patients, and they're trying to find one that can solely treat me. And they're like, all right, it doesn't seem to be working. Let's add some more. And then they give it to a normal person, and that person's like, oh no.
Right. So they have to find a safe base, right? Like a safe base, and then someone like Mason, they can add more. So that's always safer to do it that way. So
a lot of different stuff to take into account,
which people these seem like things you like know, but you don't. So,
however much just fits in one of those little injection capsules, but they have to make that custom.
Right, you figure out who figured that out.
Yeah.
So
what is it? Okay.
And then phase 3 is a large scale verification. This is where testing takes place on thousands of patients, right? And it's estimated that a fully de-risked late stage 3 program for one biologic rarely costs less than $400 million to execute. Right? And we're going to go into
biologic.
Right. And we're going to go into failure rate here in a minute, because that's remember these numbers when we jump into that.
Write them down, people. Write them down.
And so after this comes the manufacturing process, which we just covered. We just talked to you guys about. And that's where they optimize the living cell lines. They build sterile scale up bioreactors. They provide, they have to prove to regulators that every single batch will turn out exactly identical. Hard to do.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at the cost of failure right now, the cost of the failure rate. And what we were just mentioning, how much it costs to produce one. Well, what if you were listening and go, well, what if they're testing it and at any point here in phase 1, what if it causes people to be very ill and they have to stop? What if they get to phase 2? And then what if they finally get to phase 3 and doesn't work? And so
that's a huge
right.
change.
And it happens. It happens. And so the primary reason why immunomodulating biologics, they said, like Stelara, sit at the highest R&D cost spectrum is the brutal failure rate. Here's from the National Institute of Health. This number was amazing. Roughly 88% of biologic drugs fail somewhere between phase 1 and regulatory review.
88%.
So yeah, when you look at that, you think all that research and development, that went into even getting to that point is lost. So that's a risk of failure.
50% would be insane.
Still very, very high.
88% of these companies trying to find something and they are failing, and the amount of money that just crashes in on that.
Right.
88%. That is.
So you have to take into account there's people out there who've never made a dime probably on what they've done. They've risked it.
So far, we're putting money into like 3 potential places. We're putting it, 1, back into the investors and having to repay the debts.
Yeah.
2, you have to keep producing things, so you need money to be able to perpetually increase the.
Because you want to keep going, right? They're like, but we have.
And you have to pay your workers. And then 3, you have to have a backup in case you fail and lose everything.
Right.
I have a feeling there's going to be more potentially.
Yes.
Okay. Well.
So if a pharmaceutical company finances 9 failed clinical programs at $150 million each before finding one winner, the true cost of bringing that single winner to pharmacy shelves spikes by an extra $1.35 billion. So that's where I think it's confusing, because some people here it takes a couple $100 million to develop the biologic, but they're not considering the failed ones that came before it or to improve it even. I don't know how that works, but you look at that number and that's crazy. So these
you have to repay that.
That's why. That's one of the reasons why. I thought that was so interesting to me. So
they could have taken like 5 attempts before that, or
Right. I mean, you hope you're the one that's like, hey, we nailed it on the first try.
And you know how chance that is. It's like gambling.
Right. This is hard stuff. This is, you start looking at the immune system, you start looking into all of this, you're going to have so much more respect for what they're doing. And I think it's really hard to learn and hard to understand. So that's why some people just don't bother.
It's really like, you should just want to help people. And of course, everybody should. But what's so hard about helping people?
Well,
we just found out
there's
that
a huge price
billions.
tag, right?
And there's a lot of risk involved,
right? And so we're going to go into a little bit more. Here, this is something else to consider. How do FDA regulations impact this final price tag too? Because you have all this, but then you have the FDA sitting over here, which is important, guys. Like, it's not like it's good to have regulation, but they're sitting over here. They drive up that final price tag of the biologics. So like something like Stellaire, something like any of these biologics, they create immense regulatory compliance barriers, mandatory structural replication rules, and rigid clinical testing standards that lengthen development and shield the drug from cheap competition. So there's multiple factors. We're not going to cover all of that. We've covered some of this stuff in other podcasts similar, not in this way. We do have other podcasts that if you're more interested in that, take a look. One of the ways that they drive that cost up is through high cost manufacturing approvals. So traditional chemical pills, like we were saying, like an aspirin, something like that, they're regulated based on their final chemical recipe. That's it, right? You make that recipe, you make this, you can replicate it tons of times. And the FDA is like, awesome, you're good to go.
You just keep doing what you're doing and you'll get there.
The biologics, however, they're governed by the phrase, the process is the product.
Because it's a living shot, it's a living liquid or whatever they're doing,
So this is important to understand. You're going to probably find this very interesting also. The FDA mandates strict adherence to the current good manufacturing practice regulations. A manufacturer cannot simply verify the final fluid in a bottle. The FDA requires continuous testing of the living cell lines, the exact composition of the growth broth, and the validation that viral clearance steps work flawlessly. So it's ongoing.
You have to, it's not just, okay, try it once and make sure it works.
Like, they don't need to be coming back and doing this with like they said with aspirin. No. But with this, they have to keep doing it. Sure,
it's like the original product that they came up with.
So they have to, millions of dollars are spent on continuous validation testing for every single batch. And any minor alteration in the manufacturing environment requires regulatory, it says arduous, very difficult, very, very difficult, tricky regulatory reapproval process. Okay. They don't want to fall into that. So there's that. But then you're thinking, like, if you're like me, you're going, okay, so, but how do, is there a cost to get the drug approved? These are, I just read to you what they do once the drug is approved, right? How they continue to, that's where the FDA is involved too. But they're involved before they need to approve this. So the formal submission required for like a biologic like Stelara is called a biologics license application. So we're going to refer to that as a BLA.
Oh, bacon, lettuce, and
avocado.
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay.
Yum! I love avocado.
Or it could be just bacon, lettuce, and that's not as fun.
No,
yeah, an avocado.
And you're just like, and what? No, it's just and.
It's and.
So the BLA, it's one of the most rigorous and costly administrative procedures in any global industry. Okay, so this actually is interesting because Mason was looking at classes to take. He's actually taking a biotech class during the summer. And one of them was writing how to learn how to write the FDA approvals like this, right? I thought that was so interesting.
You need to learn more about it, how they actually do it.
Right. The baseline costs for a new biologic requiring full clinical trial data, the standard FDA filing fee, this is, as of the date I looked this up, so this could vary, is $4,682,003. I don't know where they threw in the $3.
What? The $3 is there?
Their processing fee. Like
just said it.
Just throw in $3. So I think they're rounding this from something. This is, again, but we'll just say roughly $4.5 million, right? So that's the baseline. That's where you're starting.
$3.
Okay. And so once approved, the manufacturer must also pay an annual prescription drug program fee to the FDA, which sits at around here. There's that 3 at the end again. Someone must like that.
So the 3 is lucky down.
Yeah, $442,213 per year to maintain market status.
Can we just make it easier and round it up to like 4 to be a whole number or something?
This would drive you nuts if you were there.
Why specific numbers? Why 13?
Numbers bother Mason. They're important to him.
It must be 5.
And so there is a note here for exceptions. The FDA will waive this multi-million-dollar fee if the drug qualifies for something called an orphan drug designation. That's if you're treating an ultra rare disease, or if the applicant is a verified first-time small business. How do you be a small business? I was like cracking up at that. I mean, their first time business is by, like you said, small business.
Okay, so how on the earth is a small business creating these biocides?
Company is a small business.
There's no way, like, a tiny little company is making these biologics. I just thought it was funny.
I don't know if it's just who was writing this and they called it, but yeah. And so, however, like the major pharmaceutical companies, someone like Janssen, they always pay the full amount. And so here's something just more fun knowledge for you guys. A standard BLA submission, because you're probably wondering, is it like, what is that application like? Is it like an application they fill out, No, it's fun. It is hundreds of thousands of pages organized into a hyper rigid, globally standardized format. So you have like module 1, which is your administrative and prescribing info. Module 2, overviews and summaries. Module 3, quality, chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, your CMC. Module 4, non-clinical study reports. Module 5, your clinical study reports. Okay, so
thousands of pages. Guys, isn't helping people sound fun?
I know. See, this is a class I was like, you should take this, right? Now you're like, see, this is why I was like, I don't think for you. No. And so that's just like, whoa. So, okay, compiling this, right? It takes cross-functional teams of medical writers, data scientists, biostatisticians, and regulatory lawyers that work for up to a year just to format the files correctly. Right? And then this is like, okay,
we're not done yet.
This is like when you're writing your essays, right? Because your whole thing gets thrown out because you like forgot a comma. Okay, so even a single tiny inconsistency or missing data point across these thousands of pages can trigger an FDA refuse to file action, instantly delaying a multi-billion-dollar launch timeline. And I'm sure they have a reapplication fee. I didn't see that, but I'm sure they're not like, we'll just,
you can just send in like, one whenever you want.
To refile, it's going to cost you, right?
$500,000.
Yeah, and just a note, this is really nothing that's too big, but an innovator, so like what we've been talking about would be the 351A biologics license application. And then you have the 351K, which is a biosimilar application. So that is going to be a slightly different process. So just to bear in mind, if someone is trying to make a biosimilar of Stelara, they're not going to do the same application process. They're going to have a slightly different application process to prove that the drug works.
My question is, who reads all this? Who reads 100-something thousand pages?
We have gone to bioscience companies, and Mason has spoke. I've spoken one with him, and we get to science, hear what they talk about, and they've mentioned, kind of joked about the immense magnitude of these approvals and this paperwork. I'm just going, I'm like in awe of it. After hearing everything has to be done, I'm thinking, wow, like that's crazy important. And it also makes sense why they say it takes forever. And you think, well, why? Well, yeah, because they have to first write this stuff up,
and they have to find it, and they have to,
and then somebody at the FDA, some people, then they got to go through this, and I'm sure AI is going to maybe change things in the future because AI maybe will sort through things faster. So anyways, interesting.
You're missing a comma on page 5.
Yeah, I don't think they'll do that, but yeah. They're like, sorry, rejected. So basically, what we want to do today is explain that the cost to get a biologic to the consumer, to us, to your normal, people with these chronic conditions, it's immense. And we don't have the answers how to help with this, but I think we have, by having more of an understanding, you can maybe look at ideas or areas where it could be potentially reduced, and probably not on the quality control. I think you don't want to remove that stuff, super important. But it's just easy to get upset and blame what you don't understand.
I still think that biologics cost a lot, but knowing what goes through these bioscience companies,
right?
I'm surprised.
With no guarantees, right?
With no guarantees. I'm surprised at their cost that it's not higher.
It's because there is such a high payout. So there is that incentive. And
here we have the patients, and we're like, the prices are too high, and the bioscience company is like, this is ridiculous.
Right. And, and I want to talk about that really just to kind of close this out. So we get frustrated because ultimately these costs affect insurance, which affects the patient and how we can get things approved for Mason or, those of you listening. So kind of the question remains, where can these costs be cut? But one of the things I want to point out is we have met with a few different bioscience companies. Like I said, I thought it was very interesting how they decide to run each of them, and they're all a little different. Some of them don't have a main office. They have like a main mailing address, but there's no headquarters. They are all working out of different areas across the country. So they're able to recruit the top talent. They're able to pay them, and they can live in areas where they want to.
Biologics got talent. We got to recruit the ones that are good.
Right? Like the good. It's important. And so they do have lab facilities, obviously, but some are not in America. They're in other places where it is less expensive to get this drug to the consumer. So some have lab facilities right here in their main office. They might have main headquarters with lab facilities. And so that's also interest. But also it's also interesting because they also may have it somewhere else too. It's not like it, but they have that too. Others have, small offices across the United States where, like one of the ones we went to, they had a place in La Jolla where the groups that lived here went to that location. And they had a couple other places where the rest went. And they had I don't know if it was in Germany or something, but that's where they had their lab facilities, was in another country. So,
I mean, I guess another way you could look at it is it's not going to be the same. But the way the blood bank is, how they have tiny little blood banks scattered about.
Right.
And then they have the big, huge foundation ones. And those are the ones that are like the main headquarters.
Right.
They have a bunch of the little ones, and they're all working together. And then,
it's price structuring. It's what they do so that they can cut costs in certain areas, and then they can also attract that top talent because that requires high paycheck. These people that they're recruiting typically are master's level have doctor's degrees.
They're making such important things, and there's so much work and precision going into it.
You want to get it done right the first time, right?
You want to get it right done the first time.
You want the best.
And you want to motivate your workers to do well, And how do you motivate workers?
Right.
Money.
Right. A good paycheck, a good company environment. And we've seen some of the cool stuff they do for their employees, and phenomenal places to work for. It seems it's incredible. And the lengths that what I think is interesting, the CEOs will go through to also keep them inspired and keep them understanding the meaning behind this creation is also really important to note. There's a whole I think a lot of people would be surprised at that these are all people that are human like us, have these emotions, have these feelings. And a lot of them, they're not just sitting there like counting their paychecks because they're not like all rich. They're just making good livings, but they also went through a lot of schooling and a lot of work to get there
to help people.
So I think it's interesting that the CEOs are recognizing the importance of appealing to the human side of them so they know what they're doing is important. It's just, it's more than just getting a product out there. Yeah. It is helping people. And so that's where like Mason comes in and shares his story.
And motivate them.
Right.
Because they're just seeing it being sent out. They don't get to actually,
it's very clinical.
Get to see it. Right. But they don't get to directly talk to it, and so that's what I like to do. Help motivate them and see the change they're making and how important they are to motivate them to keep doing what they're doing.
And I think that's important to share. I know some cynics will be like, well, they just want to make money. But ultimately, they don't have to, they don't need to bring Mason to share a story. If people just cared about money, they don't care about hearing his story. But they do. And the amount of people that ask questions afterwards, the question and answer sessions are really cool because
see people crying too.
It's amazing. And so I just really want to kind of just reiterate that the process may not just be, it is about money, but it's also about other things. And so hopefully I feel like you've learned something today, you guys listening.
I thought in the beginning, I would say these biologic companies want a lot of money, but now I would say these biologic companies need a lot of money.
Right. It makes sense.
Yeah. And it's not because obviously they need good pay and stuff, but there's just so much going into it. Single-use items that have to be so precise. There can't be any mess-ups. The FDA is constantly checking.
Right.
And the cost to run these machinery is also amazing.
Right.
And also something else that is costing is over time this will affect, because with how much one biologic costs and how a lot of it is like a small fraction of what they're making is turned into the actual biologics, and a lot of it is left. And then how some of these are taken by the FDA to be tested. Not all of the product they're outputting is what is reaching the patients. So there's a lot of not waste, but a lot
in a
of
sense,
non-profit going there too.
Right.
Because it's just there to be tested, or it just wasn't on. No, right.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of going on. There's so much. It's not just let's make a biologic and we're gonna ask 100,000 for it. No, there's so much.
Right. And I think, I would guess too why, because we were saying this the other day. We're like, why is Mason Solera so expensive? But I'm guessing it's inflation.
It answers the question, because it's not just something that's going to be like anything else where as it gets older, it loses costs. It loses price. But when there's something that requires so much upkeep, so much precision, so much work, so much money
facilities,
to keep running, the price is going to go with inflation. It's just going to keep going up because it's still in demand, and there's a whole lot of different factors going into it.
Right. So these are all things that I think when you get your bill and you're mad because you're like, oh, this is, luckily we have, the other cool thing they do is they offer rebate programs, a lot of these drug companies. So they help offset the cost. They do recognize that. So there is help. Typically really out of pocket, we will spend like $50 on Mason's Stellara. The Entyvio is a little bit more upfront, but over the course of the year ends up being nothing because that goes through medical.
Price rising, insurance is like.
Yeah, watching it, right? And so the hardest part is that insurance doesn't want to approve things because it is too expensive. And so a lot of people go without, they end up having to take something else. So that is the biggest hurdle. Once you're on it, it's like for us, it's pretty fair. I'm not going to complain with what's going on, but I do know insurance might. So I get it. And I think it's just important before you just get mad at something. It's more important to understand it and maybe start thinking of ways where, what can change in our country to help these costs and to help people get what they need.
Help the biologic company, help the consumers.
Help in that cycle of FDA, the bioscience companies, insurance, consumer, in that circle, what do we do to make it better? So that's why this was an important little series, I think. To kind of we'll be able to conclude that now, and we're going to leave it there.
I have a great idea. We're going to create a non-profit biologic.
Right. I'm sure there's people just.
I feel like if the most rich people in America, all grouped together, all the richest people, and try to start a nonprofit biologic company, they wouldn't even be able to support that
It's
company.
still, yeah. And I mean, you need it, they do deserve to be paid. And if the investors deserve that. And if you're putting, people buy stocks and they want to be paid too. They don't want to lose money.
No. You want to make the stock people happy so they'll keep investing.
Right.
And
hopefully you can keep creating more product. So with that, we're going to be back in 2 weeks. And at that point, we're going to probably make our official book launch announcement. So we'll tell you more about that, but that'll be exciting. I think that has been, I got the proof on Mother's Day, and it was so exciting to see it just in the paperback. We have paperback and hardback. We have not yet seen the hardback. So that's why as soon as we get everything, we've looked everything over, it'll be launching, and we'll be sure to tell you guys, more about it in the next episode. So look forward to that. And we went to a farm this week, the Daisy McDonald farm.
So cute.
Amazing place. Check out our Instagram if you want to see pictures. We have horses, mini goats, llamas.
Yes.
We didn't get pictures of the bunnies or the chickens. So cute though.
Okay, so the bunnies, lop ears.
Lop ears.
I call them loppers for some reason, but they're lop ears.
I know.
And they're so cute. They look like
they look.
I'm trying to think of a dog that has floppy ears. Basically, they look like that, but really tiny, and they look
so
like a bunny.
They were so sweet. And then there was birds,
cockatiels.
Yes, and then they have 500-year-old olive trees. So the farm is in Rancho Santa Fe here in California, and so we're very close to it, and we're able to go visit. But they have these 500-year-old olive trees, and they purchased them from Napa Valley and had them brought down. So these are incredible trees. And we were so fortunate enough, we were gifted before we left with a bottle of olive oil from these trees. So super cool.
It tastes like Italy.
Yes. And the horses were beautiful. It was just such a cool thing. So check out our Instagram at Team IB Determined if you want to see pictures. We do have a few of those posted. And you guys can listen to us on any podcast station like iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify.
And there's links to more.
Yep.
If
any of the other ones on that.
On Buzzsprout, there's more links to more.
We'll include that for you guys.
But I don't know if you need that because if you're listening to us already, you probably
might be on a podcast station already. But you might
find more. Yeah, but
they might be on YouTube.
Yeah, you might be on YouTube too.
Yeah,
and if you're on YouTube, you're probably watching us on the videos and not the YouTube podcast. But there's a chance you're watching us on YouTube podcast.
Right.
But if you're on YouTube, nevertheless, make sure to give us a like and subscribe. And if you want to be notified every time we post a new video, make sure to hit that bell icon and please leave comments. We love reading your guys' comments.
Yeah.
When's it positive? Did you learn anything from today's episode? What brought you to today's episode?
You stuck around to the end. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
We always appreciate, that and hope that you're actually enjoying this. And maybe you're on, maybe you're driving home from work and listening to us. And hopefully this was interesting. You feel like, thank you guys for listening.
Yes.
And we will be back in 2 weeks with the next episode. All right, guys.
Have
Bye.
a good day. Bye.
We hope you will stick around, tune in, and reach out to us with your own journeys. We are excited to give you an inside view of what it takes to be a caregiver and what it's like to be a patient.
And most of all, we hope you'll maybe be able to apply something you hear on here that might help you in your own life. Sometimes life changes, and it's all about how you handle the journey.